I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My legs froze, heart pounding, and for a few seconds it felt like the world had stopped spinning. There she was, my daughter, my sweet little girl with a mobility disorder, tied to a tree in our front yard with thick ropes dug into her arms and legs. Her wheelchair had been thrown aside, like trash. Her eyes were wide, filled with silent terror, lips trembling but no sound coming out. And standing a few feet away, arms crossed like she had just won a battle, was Karen, our HOA president, with a smug, satisfied expression that made my blood boil. No shame, no remorse, just pride. She was trespassing, Karen muttered coldly, as if that excused every ounce of cruelty she had just committed. She didn't flinch when I screamed. She didn't move when I called the police. She didn't even blink when my daughter began sobbing, barely able to breathe between gasps of fear. And as the neighbors came running, as sirens echoed in the distance, Karen stood firm, like she was making some kind of statement to the entire neighborhood. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, calculated, a grown woman tying a disabled child to a tree like some warning sign. I wish I could tell you this was the first time she crossed a line. I wish I could say this started and ended on that day. But the truth is, this moment was just the breaking point. What led up to this? What gave her the confidence to do something this twisted in broad daylight? What kind of neighborhood lets this happen without stopping it? To understand how a neighbor turned into a monster and how an innocent child became her target, you need to hear everything. Because the moment Karen tied my daughter to that tree, she unleashed a story the world needed to hear. We moved into that neighborhood thinking it would be a fresh start. After years of saving, planning, and praying, my wife and I finally found a home that seemed perfect. Quiet streets, good schools, friendly listings, and just enough yard space for our daughter to enjoy some sun when she was up to it. She was 8 years old when we moved in, diagnosed with a rare neuromuscular disorder that made walking difficult, but her spirit, unshakable. She was a warrior in a child's body, someone who smiled even when the world seemed too hard. We had barely unpacked our last box when we met her, the president of the HOA, Karen. Short bob haircut, stiff polo shirt, clipboard in hand, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She welcomed us in a way that was polite, but clipped, like she was keeping score. "You'll find this community has standards," she said while glancing at the wheelchair ramp I had installed before move-in. "We just like to make sure everyone follows the rules." At first, we brushed it off. Maybe she was just the type who took her responsibilities a bit too seriously. But soon it became clear. Karen wasn't just enforcing the rules. She was the rules. Within a week, we got our first notice. Apparently, our trash bins were visible from the street for 2 hours longer than the HOA allowed. Then came the warning about a decorative birdhouse we had placed in the front yard. Then another about the non-regulation height of our mailbox. It was constant, exhausting, and always signed by Karen. Still, we tried to stay civil. We waved politely, responded respectfully, and never engaged. We didn't want drama. Our daughter's condition already made life complicated enough. She had weekly therapy sessions, special education plans, and constant medical checkups. The last thing we needed was neighborhood politics. But Karen didn't like being ignored, and it was my daughter who unintentionally became the center of it all. One sunny afternoon, my daughter was playing outside. Well, sitting really. She loved drawing with sidewalk chalk and making little sketches on the pavement. I sat beside her, sketchbook in hand, watching her carefully draw flowers, stars, and suns across the concrete path leading to our front steps. Karen walked by. She paused. Her eyes narrowed at the chalk. And then, without saying a word, she snapped a picture on her phone and walked away. The next day, we received a violation notice for graffiti-like markings on HOA common space. But it wasn't common space. It was our property, our driveway. I wrote back with evidence and respectfully asked for clarification. No response, just another warning. After that, things escalated, subtly but steadily. Our daughter's wheelchair-accessible swing, which we had set up in the backyard, complaint, unapproved structure. The accessible ramp, Aesthetic disruption. Even her small garden patch, just 3 tomato plants and some basil, was deemed non-compliant landscaping. My wife and I tried to appeal. We attended an HOA meeting. Karen controlled the room like a courtroom judge, interrupting us mid-sentence and waving documents we'd never seen. Other neighbors seemed uncomfortable but silent, nodding along, afraid to be next in her crosshairs. What made it worse, Karen never addressed my daughter by name. She only referred to her as the child or the wheelchair. Never once did she ask how she was. Never smiled at her. Never acknowledged her presence except as a disturbance. The emotional toll started to show. My daughter began asking questions I didn't know how to answer. Why doesn't the lady like me? Is my chair making her angry? Do we have to move again? As a father, there's a special kind of helplessness when you realize that your child feels like a burden to the world, and it's not because of her condition. It's because of people like Karen. The turning point came one rainy morning. I had just returned from a long shift when I saw her, Karen, standing at our front door with a tape measure, measuring the ramp, scribbling things down. I walked up, tried to be cordial. "What are you doing?" She didn't even flinch, checking for ADA violations. If it's not built correctly, it could be a liability. That was the moment I stopped being polite. "You mean if it's not built to your standards?" She raised an eyebrow and smirked. "Same thing. I filed a complaint with the city. I documented everything. I called an attorney to explore our options. But the gears of bureaucracy move slow, and Karen knew exactly how to work around them. She started spreading lies, told neighbors we were bringing down the property value, that our daughter's ramp was unsafe for children, that our landscaping was non-native and invasive. We felt isolated, targeted, but worst of all, we were being worn down. She didn't need to win in court. She just needed to make life unbearable. And that's what led to that day. The day Karen took things so far, even the people who once feared her couldn't stay silent anymore. But before we get there, you need to see what kind of power she thought she had. What kind of person she truly was. Because once I start telling you what happened that morning, you'll understand this wasn't about rules. This was about control. And Karen thought she owned everything, even my daughter's right to exist in peace. It started with a dog poop bag. One evening, my wife and I were wheeling our daughter around the block, her favorite part of the day. She loved pointing at the birds, the mailboxes, the neighbors' garden gnomes. We had almost reached the corner when we heard the familiar click of Karen's garden gate. She stood there, arms folded, eyes locked on the small bag of waste I had tied to the side of the wheelchair, waiting to throw it in our bin when we got home. "You can't carry that around," she snapped before we could pass. "That's unsanitary." I blinked. "It's sealed." "Still," she said, stepping onto the sidewalk, blocking our path, "this is a family neighborhood." "I have a family," I said, now firm, "and I'm taking care of mine." Karen gave a tight smile, the kind people wear when they've already decided they're right. "There are procedures. There are policies. This isn't a hospital ward." That was the first time she referenced my daughter's disability in a way that felt like an accusation. From that point on, her tone shifted from bureaucratic to personal. A few days later, a folded letter appeared in our mailbox. No envelope, no official letterhead, just a printed note. "This neighborhood is not zoned for medical-grade ramps, unpermitted swing installations, or therapy-related equipment in front yards. Please restore property appearance to maintain HOA standards. Final warning." I checked with the HOA charter. There was nothing about medical equipment or accessibility being prohibited. But Karen didn't need policy, she had presence. She was a walking rulebook no one dared challenge. Except me. I wrote a formal letter, CC'd the local ADA office, and requested an emergency HOA review. The next meeting was scheduled a week later. That week was hell. We found trash dumped on our lawn. Our mailbox was dented. One morning, we woke up to find chalk drawings scribbled over with permanent black marker, my daughter's sketches destroyed. She cried for an hour. I filed police reports, but with no cameras, no witnesses, there wasn't much they could do. Then came the meeting. Karen sat at the head of a table, flanked by board members who either feared her or owed her favors. I came prepared with documents, photos, timestamps, disability law clauses. I wasn't there to win sympathy. I came for clarity. But Karen wasn't playing fair. As soon as I stood to speak, she cut me off. Let's remember, this is a homeowners association, she said, not a courtroom. Another board member raised his hand. Shouldn't we at least hear the concerns? Karen shook her head. He's already filed with the ADA. Let the government handle it. We have flowers growing beyond regulation height in Lot 12. Let's focus on actual neighborhood issues. The room fell silent. I looked around, no one met my eyes. They all looked down, fiddled with pens, or stared at the water pitcher like it held the answers. I left that meeting with nothing but rage in my chest. Karen had silenced me in public, humiliated me. And the worst part? She had made it clear she wouldn't stop until we either conformed or left. The next week, the incident happened. It was a Saturday. My wife was at work, and I was cleaning out the garage. Our daughter asked if she could go out front and draw. I said yes. I was just steps away. I checked on her every few minutes through the open door. She was happy, scribbling stars and flowers with chalk like always. Then the doorbell rang. It was Mr. Langley, our elderly neighbor across the street. He looked out of breath. She's with her, he said, urgently. Who? That woman, Karen. She just grabbed her. I ran down the driveway, across the yard, past the hedge, and there, on Karen's property, near the edge of her yard, I saw it. My daughter's chair was toppled over, and my little girl, she was tied to a tree, ropes around her arms, a strip of cloth across her lap, and duct tape slapped over her legs. She wasn't gagged, but her voice was hoarse. She had been yelling, crying. I don't know for how long. Karen stood nearby, calm as a monk in meditation. When I stormed up to her, she didn't even blink. She rolled onto my lawn, she said coldly. I gave her a timeout. Kids need boundaries. My fists clenched. She's disabled. You tied her up like an animal. She shouldn't have been on my property, she said, tapping her clipboard. You know that violates. I don't give a damn about your rules. I untied my daughter while dialing the police. She clung to me, sobbing. Neighbors came out. Whispers, gasps, phones filming. Even people who'd stayed silent all this time looked horrified. She tied a child up, one woman said, trembling. Karen didn't retreat. She stood proudly, arms crossed, as if daring us all to defy her. I have the right to protect my property, she muttered. But this wasn't about property. It was about power. Karen had lost her grip on control, and in that desperation, she tried to make an example of my child. The police arrived minutes later. They separated us, took statements. Karen claimed it was restraint for trespassing. I showed them the marks on my daughter's arms, the rope burns, the flattened chair. The officers' faces shifted from protocol to fury. An ambulance arrived. My daughter was checked for injuries. Thankfully, she was shaken but physically okay. Karen was taken in for questioning. And just like that, the mask she wore for years began to crack. The neighborhood was never the same after that day. Within hours of the incident, videos from bystanders started circulating online. A short clip, a few seconds long, showed me sprinting toward the tree, shouting, and untying my daughter. Another captured Karen's calm, cold statement to the police. She rolled onto my property. I was enforcing boundaries. The footage went viral within a day. By Monday morning, hashtags were trending. Hashtag HOA Karen, hashtag Justice for Emily, hashtag Boundaries Gone Too Far. News vans parked at the entrance of our subdivision. Reporters hounded neighbors for interviews. And finally, after years of Karen ruling like a quiet tyrant, her power began to unravel publicly. But inside our home, the damage was still real. My daughter refused to go outside. Every time we opened the front door, she panicked, crying, clutching her blanket like it was armor. She wouldn't sleep unless we left the hallway lights on. Her drawing stopped. Her laughter stopped. And every night she'd whisper, she'll come back. The legal system moved slower than the internet. Karen was charged, but not with kidnapping as I had hoped. The DA filed charges for unlawful restraint, child endangerment, and assault on a minor with disabilities. But she was released on bail within hours. She returned to her home the very next day. We closed the curtains. We installed cameras. But even with all that, her presence across the street felt like a gun pointed at our peace. Then came the HOA fallout. Dozens of neighbors who had stayed silent for years suddenly found their voices. Turns out, we weren't the only ones targeted. An elderly couple was fined repeatedly for installing handrails. A military veteran with PTSD had his therapy flags removed. A single mother was threatened with eviction over her son's trampoline. All these stories came out once people realized the monster behind the mask. A petition to remove Karen from the HOA presidency gained over 4,000 signatures in 3 days, many from people outside the neighborhood, some from across the country. Media outlets ran deep dives into HOA abuse cases. Karen became the face of something bigger, something cruel, quiet, and systemic. But she didn't take it lying down. She filed her own lawsuits against me for defamation, against the HOA for wrongful suspension, and even against the city, claiming her property rights had been violated. Every step she took, she painted herself as the victim. A woman harassed by online mobs. A concerned citizen caught in a media witch hunt. She went on conservative talk shows, calling it reverse ableism. One headline read, HOA president faces internet backlash for enforcing neighborhood standards. She never once said my daughter's name, but the community had changed. That month, we held a town forum. Unofficial but crowded. Neighbors filled folding chairs in the church auditorium. A father of 2, who once coached Little League, stood up and said, I didn't speak up. And now, a child was tied to a tree. That's on all of us. People cried. People apologized. People donated. An anonymous fund covered my legal expenses. Another neighbor, a lawyer, volunteered to take Karen's defamation countersuit head-on for free. My wife and I weren't used to support. For so long, we'd felt isolated, like we were holding up a dam no one else could see cracking. But now we weren't alone. Still, the emotional scars deepened. My daughter's therapist diagnosed her with trauma-induced anxiety. She began attending sessions twice a week. She drew a picture of a tree with ropes on it and said, That's the monster. I gently asked, Where's Karen? She pointed at the tree, not the woman. The act. That's what stayed with her. Karen's house became a fortress, boarded windows, security lights, and eventually a for sale sign. She didn't wave anymore. She didn't walk the neighborhood anymore. And most days, her driveway stayed empty. But the storm wasn't over. 3 weeks later, we received a letter from her attorney demanding a cease and desist. They wanted us to stop speaking about the incident in any public or private venue, claiming it defamed her and was causing emotional and financial distress. That was the moment I truly broke, because my daughter hadn't even stepped outside since that day, because we were still healing, and now she wanted silence? No. I wrote a post that night. Just one paragraph. My disabled daughter was tied to a tree by our HOA president. She called it enforcing boundaries. My daughter called it a monster. And I call it what it is, abuse. I will not be quiet. I will not stop. Not until the laws change, not until children like mine are seen as human, and not until people like Karen are held accountable. That post got 2 million views in 24 hours. We were invited onto talk shows. Advocacy groups reached out. The story was picked up in Europe. A documentary filmmaker contacted us. And slowly, what started as horror became something else, hope. People began sharing their stories. From gated communities, school, districts, landlords, disabled children, veterans, immigrants, anyone who'd been targeted because they didn't fit in. We had become a symbol, but we were still just a family, still navigating grief, fear, and uncertainty. And Karen? She disappeared. No one saw the moving trucks. No one ever said goodbye. One morning, the house was just empty. The tree in her yard, the one where she tied my daughter, is still there. But neighbors came together and transformed it. They wrapped it with colorful yarn, hung paper butterflies from its branches, and added a plaque at the base. Let no child ever feel like they don't belong. The trial didn't happen in some grand courthouse. It was a small courtroom, barely 10 rows of benches, with fluorescent lights that buzzed louder than the whispers of the press seated in the back. But to us, it was everything. Karen sat at the defense table, still composed, still wearing that same smug poise like nothing could touch her. But this time, she didn't have her clipboard. She didn't have the HOA board behind her. She didn't have silence protecting her. She had evidence stacked against her. Police reports, witness testimonies, video footage, and most damning of all, my daughter's own words, spoken softly in a recorded statement played aloud before the judge. She said I didn't belong. She tied me because I touched her grass. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Karen's lawyer argued that it was a misunderstood attempt at discipline, that the child had entered private property, and that Karen had panicked. But the judge wasn't buying it. You tied a disabled child to a tree, she said firmly. There is no circumstance under any HOA policy, neighborhood regulation, or legal precedent that justifies that kind of action. Period. When the verdict came in, guilty on all 3 charges, Karen didn't flinch. But for the first time, I saw her eyes flicker. That iron wall cracked. She was sentenced to 6 months in county jail and ordered to pay damages, both civil and emotional. She lost her home to cover legal costs. Her name, once spoken with fear in our neighborhood, was now a cautionary tale nationwide. But justice didn't end with handcuffs. Justice came later in quieter moments. Like the first time my daughter picked up her chalk again, she drew a butterfly on the sidewalk in bright yellow and blue. Is that for the tree? I asked. She nodded. To protect it from bad people. Justice came when the mayor invited us to speak about HOA accountability at a town hall, when state lawmakers drafted a bill nicknamed Emily's Law, aimed at protecting disabled individuals from abuse under the guise of neighborhood enforcement. Justice came when a kid in a wheelchair from 2 states oversent us a letter that read, I saw what happened. I thought I was alone. Now I know I'm not. But for me, the final reveal, the true breaking point, was something more intimate. It was one night, just a few weeks after the trial. I was putting my daughter to bed. She still insisted on sleeping with her light on, and she always double-checked the door lock. But that night, she asked me something new. Can we visit the tree tomorrow? I hesitated. You sure? She nodded. I think it's not scary anymore. Because people saw. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about Karen. This was about visibility, about truth, about what happens when silence is broken and the world is forced to look at what it normally avoids. Karen tried to prove a point, but in doing so, she proved mine. That hate disguised as order is still hate. That rules built on cruelty don't deserve respect. And that no child, especially one who already battles the world with every breath, should ever have to fear being seen as less than human. Weeks passed, then months, and slowly, the world began to move on. The news cycle shifted. Another scandal. Another tragedy. The viral posts faded from the trending lists. But in our home, the story never stopped living. Healing doesn't follow a 24-hour news cycle. It moves at the pace of breath, of therapy, of silence that finally feels safe again. My daughter began going outside again, not far, just the porch, then the sidewalk, eventually the yard. But now she wore headphones when she rolled through the neighborhood. Not for music, for focus. She told me it helped drown out the fear sounds. We planted sunflowers near the spot where she used to draw. At first, they felt like a bandage, then like armor. She watered them every morning, and when they bloomed, she smiled and said, they're bigger than her now. I knew who her meant. The neighbors who once avoided us now waved first. Some brought cookies, books, or hand-painted signs. We weren't that family with the ramp anymore. We were the family who stood up, and we were proud of that. But I didn't stop there. With the support of a disability rights group, we helped launch a national initiative called Not on My Block. It's a campaign pushing for HOA reforms, ensuring accessibility modifications can't be denied, and that abuse under the guise of rules results in real consequences. The bill, we inspired, unofficially dubbed Emily's Law, was reviewed in 3 states. 2 passed it. 1 is still debating it. People wrote to us. Strangers from Germany, the UK, even Japan. Parents with disabled children, war veterans, caretakers. They all had the same story, just dressed in different houses and faces. They made us feel like outsiders. They used policies to hide their prejudice. Your story gave us permission to speak. But there's something else I want to say. This was never about fame. It wasn't about going viral or headlines. It was about that single, unbearable moment, seeing my child tied up like a criminal when all she had done was exist. You don't ever forget a moment like that. But what surprised me, what changed me, was realizing how many people do forget. Not because they're bad, but because no one ever showed them. They don't see what we live. They assume the system is fair. The rules are neutral. The quiet is peace. It's not. Silence often protects the cruel. But not anymore. Not here. Not again. To the parents who feel alone, you are not. To the children who feel too different to belong, you do. To every person who has ever been punished just for being seen, your existence is not a disturbance. It's a reminder of what matters. My daughter still draws. She still rolls across sidewalks, still dreams, still believes in good people. Because in the end, kindness did show up. Truth did break through, and love, fierce and loud, stood taller than any clipboard or policy. Karen wanted to prove a point, but in trying to make my daughter invisible, she made her unforgettable. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the HOA stories, where real people speak the truth behind the picket fences, where silence is broken, where rules are questioned, and where justice is more than a headline. Like, share and comment, because someone out there is still tied to their own invisible tree. Let's help them cut the rope